My mom, Angela, 57F, didn't attend my wedding, and if that wasn't disappointing enough, the reason was downright absurd. Imagine preparing for what's supposed to be one of the happiest days of your life, only to be told by your own mother that she won't be there because my older sister Carla, 29F, got married earlier in the year. According to Mom, she couldn't possibly give another daughter attention so soon and didn't want my wedding to overshadow Carla's. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A little background to paint the picture. My sister Carla has always been the golden child. She's the favorite, the one who could do no wrong, while I, Jess, 27F, have spent my whole life feeling like an afterthought. Growing up, it was like walking a tightrope of never-ending comparisons. Carla could get away with anything. If she came home with a poor test score, Mom would laugh it off, saying she must have been tired or distracted. But if I ever brought home anything less than stellar, it became a full-blown lecture on applying myself and taking life seriously. The favoritism felt like a physical weight, a constant reminder that no matter how hard I tried, I would never measure up. It wasn't just academics either. Every extracurricular, every friend, and every little achievement was put under Mom's scrutiny, and inevitably compared to Carla's. It seemed that nothing I did could measure up. Carla played volleyball, so I joined the volleyball team, hoping Mom would come cheer me on. But while she'd be there front and center for Carla, I barely got a nod of acknowledgement. And that dynamic continued well into adulthood. I've spent years working my butt off, trying to do something, anything, that might earn me a little of the attention Mom so effortlessly showered on my sister. So when I got engaged, I genuinely thought, finally, this is it, my moment. I was beyond thrilled, hoping that for once I might get a bit of that maternal support and excitement I'd watched Carla bask in for years. My fiancé Sam and I had been together for 5 incredible years, and we were both eager to take this next big step. We spent hours talking over the details, envisioning every little aspect of our big day, thrilled to celebrate with the people we loved. And I wanted my mom to be there, to share in the happiness and see me as more than just the other daughter. But when I told Mom about the wedding, her reaction wasn't what I'd expected at all. I was anticipating maybe a congratulatory hug or an "I'm so happy for you." But her first response was a cold, dismissive, "Are you sure you want to do this now? Carla just got married this year?" It felt like a punch in the gut. I tried to explain that our wedding was in a different season, so it wasn't like we'd be competing. I hoped she would understand that I wasn't trying to overshadow Carla or take away from her big day. I just wanted to celebrate my own love story. But she couldn't seem to see it that way. She was convinced that my wedding would somehow steal Carla's thunder, and the more I tried to reason with her, the less she seemed to care. It was almost like she wasn't even registering how big this was for me. People get married in the same year all the time. It's not that big of a deal, or at least it shouldn't be. But in my mom's world, everything revolves around Carla. I tried to brush off her reaction, telling myself she'd come around eventually. Maybe, I thought, once she saw how excited I was, she'd start to get on board. I even offered to make the wedding smaller and more intimate if that would make her feel better about it. But she just brushed off every attempt I made to include her or get her to care. Her response was always the same. "I can't divide my focus between 2 weddings in the same year. It was as though my wedding didn't count because Carla had already had hers. Mom made excuse after excuse, saying she didn't want Carla to feel less special. I was dumbfounded. Carla had the works for her wedding. The big dress, the extravagant reception, the whole 9 yards. Mom had been front and center, showing off photos and telling anyone who'd listen every little detail. Carla had her day, and now it was supposed to be my turn. But apparently, my special day was a threat to her spotlight. Despite all of this, I tried to stay positive. My fiancé Sam was incredible through the whole thing, and we were determined to make our wedding beautiful and memorable. We poured our hearts into planning every detail, focusing on the people who actually wanted to be there to celebrate with us. But with each passing day, it became increasingly clear that Mom wasn't going to change her mind. Her comments felt less like concerns and more like a refusal to accept that my day mattered too. No matter how many times I reached out, she wasn't budging. After yet another conversation that felt more like an argument, she finally told me outright that she wouldn't be coming to my wedding. She didn't want to split her focus because it would take away from Carla's moment. It was one of the most hurtful things I'd ever heard from her. I felt like I'd done everything I could to make her feel comfortable, but it still wasn't enough, so I gave up trying to appease her. It wasn't easy, but I decided that I wasn't going to let her absence ruin what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. This was my wedding. I had dreamed about this day for years, and I wasn't going to let her stubbornness take that away from me. Sam and I were determined to move forward and make it a beautiful day filled with joy and love. Sam had an idea that brought some comfort, writing a speech for the reception that would acknowledge her absence without sounding confrontational. He suggested we find a way to address the situation honestly but gracefully, letting the people who cared know what was going on without making a scene. I was on board, and together we started working on a speech that would express both my gratitude for those who showed up and my honest feelings about my mom's absence. Writing that speech was surprisingly therapeutic. It was my chance to be open and to acknowledge the truth of what had happened without making it messy or disrespectful. It was the only way I knew to address the elephant in the room and let everyone know where I stood, to stand up for myself and for what I believed I deserved. The speech was simple and to the point, but I felt it struck the right chord, mixing my gratitude with a touch of the raw honesty I'd been bottling up for years. The wedding day finally arrived. Even though there was a strange void where Mom's support should have been, I felt an overwhelming sense of joy and relief. Surrounded by close friends, family, and Sam, who had been my rock through this whole ordeal, I knew I was going to make the most of this day. I tried not to let Mom's absence weigh on my mind. I told myself I was going to focus on the love around me, on Sam, and on the beautiful future we were starting together. Everything was perfect. The venue, the flowers, the ceremony. When the time came for the reception, I knew this was my moment to finally speak my truth. Sam held my hand and whispered a few reassuring words, and I felt my confidence surge. I stepped up to the microphone, looking out at the people who had made an effort to be there for us, who saw my worth and valued our relationship enough to show up and celebrate with us. The speech began with my gratitude. I thanked everyone for their support, their love, and their presence. I spoke about how much it meant to have them all there on such an important day. But then, with a deep breath, I shifted gears to address the elephant in the room. I acknowledged that someone very important to me couldn't be there, that my mom had chosen to miss the wedding because she felt it might overshadow my sister Carla's. I know she's been busy, I said, with a small, forced smile. Making sure Carla's wedding stays the highlight of the family's year. I wouldn't want today to take away from that, so I completely understand why she couldn't make it. I heard a few gasps, some uncomfortable chuckles, and a few murmurs rippling through the crowd. But I pressed on, wanting to finish with dignity. I ended with something honest, but laced with a bit of the pain I'd felt for so long. I'm grateful for everything she's taught me, especially about resilience and learning how to handle being second best. It's really prepared me for today, and I hope to carry that strength forward. I wrapped up with another round of thanks, glancing at Sam, who was beaming with pride. The people who mattered were here, sharing this moment with me, and I could feel the love and support radiating from them. It wasn't about putting my mom on blast. It was about finally speaking my truth. For once, I wasn't hiding the hurt or pretending everything was fine. After the wedding, I thought that would be the end of it. I figured my speech would be a small part of our day and that, in time, I'd just move forward without Mom's approval. But the internet had other plans. One of our guests posted a clip of my speech on social media. I hadn't thought about how the internet works or how fast things can spread, and the next thing I knew, it went viral. Thousands of people were sharing it, commenting on it, and offering their own takes on what had happened. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years started reaching out, and even friends of friends were sending messages of support. They told me how brave I was for speaking up, how they could relate, and how refreshing it was to hear someone address family drama openly instead of sweeping it under the rug. But as expected, not everyone was happy. Some thought my speech was inappropriate or disrespectful. And then, of course, Mom found out. I barely had a chance to settle back into normal life before she called. She was furious. I could barely get a word in as she went on a tirade about how I'd embarrassed her and how I'd publicly aired private family matters in front of everyone. She accused me of being spiteful, claiming I had purposely set out to humiliate her and make her look bad. The whole conversation felt like being trapped under a wave of anger and accusation, and I couldn't get a single thought out in my defense. I tried to explain that it wasn't my intent to hurt or humiliate her. I just wanted to speak honestly to acknowledge the pain I'd felt from her decision not to be there for me on such an important day. I reminded her that I hadn't even been the one to post the speech online, but she wasn't listening. To her, this was all about her public image and how others were seeing her, not about how her actions had affected me. It was infuriating. It was like she couldn't understand that this was about me trying to express my own feelings, not about shaming her. At one point in her angry rant, she even accused me of betraying her, of trying to ruin her reputation on purpose. I sat there on the phone, feeling completely lost. Part of me wanted to apologize, to try and smooth things over just to get her to calm down. But I stopped myself. I reminded myself that I hadn't done anything wrong. I had every right to be honest about my feelings. It wasn't about destroying her reputation or making her feel small. It was about finally standing up for myself and not hiding in Carla's shadow anymore. After that phone call, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was guilt. Of course there was guilt. She's still my mom, and no matter how much she hurt me, part of me still didn't want to cause her pain. I never wanted things to escalate this far, and now it felt like I was trapped in a no-win situation. But alongside the guilt, there was a sense of vindication. For the first time in my life, I felt like people were seeing my side of things. People were understanding what I'd been dealing with for years. It was like finally, after all this time, someone was witnessing the years of favoritism and dismissiveness I'd endured. And that gave me a sense of freedom I hadn't felt before. Of course, Carla didn't see it that way. She called me soon after, siding with Mom, and said I'd overreacted. She didn't get why I couldn't just let it go. She said I should have just accepted that Mom couldn't be there, that she couldn't be in two places at once, emotionally, I suppose. Carla was baffled by why I'd even mentioned it in my speech. To her, it was all old news and family stuff that didn't need to be talked about in public. But how was I supposed to just accept that? How was I supposed to be okay with the fact that my own mom didn't want to come to my wedding because it might somehow steal Carla's thunder? I wasn't asking for some big, show-stopping moment or anything over the top. I just wanted my mom to show up for me and care about my happiness without it having to be a competition. But somehow Carla just didn't get it. It wasn't about taking away from her. It was about my right to celebrate my life and love without feeling like an afterthought. Carla and I went back and forth a bit, but it was clear she wasn't going to understand. She thought I was being dramatic, that I was making a big deal out of nothing. But this wasn't nothing to me. It was my wedding, and I just wanted my mom to be there. Now, newly married, I was supposed to be relishing the joy of this new chapter in my life. But instead, I was left dealing with a fractured family, a mom who still wasn't speaking to me, and a sister who thought I was in the wrong for wanting even a sliver of acknowledgement. Some of my extended family reached out to me, showing their support and pride in me for finally standing up for myself. They told me they understood how hard it must have been, and that I'd been brave to say what I said. Their words were a huge comfort and reminded me that, despite everything, there were still people in my life who got it, who had my back. On the flip side, others felt I'd been out of line. They thought I should have kept quiet, kept things private, and not used my wedding to air grievances. Their comments made me question myself. Maybe they were right. Maybe I could have handled it differently. But deep down, I was glad I did it. For once, I'd put my feelings out there. For once, I wasn't hiding or pretending everything was fine. It was a bittersweet feeling. I was happy with my decision to go ahead with the wedding and speak my truth. But now I was faced with the reality of what that truth had cost. I was left wondering if I could ever fix things with Mom and Carla, or if this was just how it was going to be from now on. A family divided, me on one side, them on the other. After the wedding, Sam and I took a few days to ourselves. We wanted to unwind and just savor the start of our married life. But that peace didn't last long. Mom started calling, and I could tell from the missed calls alone that she was nowhere near letting things go. She called so many times that I had to block her, something I never thought I'd have to do with my own mother. It was my honeymoon, for crying out loud. The last thing I needed was to feel trapped under her relentless demands for an explanation, or for me to take down the viral video, which again, I hadn't even posted. Even after we got home, the storm didn't let up. Mom had filled our home voicemail with messages, each one angrier than the last. They were full of accusations, complaints, and a steady stream of outrage about how I'd ruined her reputation and made her the laughingstock of her friends and clients. And that wasn't the worst of it. One day, I finally decided to listen to a few messages, thinking maybe she'd calm down. But instead, I heard something I couldn't have anticipated. In one of the messages, she flat out threatened to sue me for defamation. She actually said those words, "Sue me." I remember just standing there, phone in hand, in total shock. Was she really talking about suing her own daughter over a speech at my wedding? I thought she'd been mad before, but this was something else entirely. I called her back, hoping to clear things up. I tried explaining that I wasn't the one who had posted the video. I told her I didn't have control over who shared it online, and even if I had, there was nothing defamatory about what I said. But none of that mattered to her. She didn't care who posted it or how people saw it. All she could focus on was how embarrassed she felt, how betrayed she was, and how in her mind I'd publicly humiliated her. After I hung up, I couldn't shake the dread that had settled in my stomach. What if she actually went through with it? What would this mean for my family, for my relationships with my dad, my relatives, and everyone else caught in this mess? It was like she was determined to take this as far as possible, without caring about the damage she'd leave behind. Then, a week or so later, things somehow got even worse. A letter arrived at our house from a lawyer. Or at least it was supposed to be from a lawyer. It was one of those moments where time just slows down, and I felt like I was watching myself open it from somewhere outside my body. Inside, the letter stated that Mom was officially suing me for defamation and demanding $5,000 in damages. It was surreal. I could barely wrap my head around it. My mom was taking me to court, all because of a few sentences in my wedding speech. The letter claimed that, because she worked as a hairdresser in our town, the negative publicity from the video had caused her to lose clients and hurt her reputation. It went on and on about how I'd inflicted irreparable harm on her career, and how she was entitled to compensation for both financial loss and the emotional distress I'd supposedly caused. The words were burning themselves into my mind, each one making me feel like I was suffocating. For a few minutes, I just sat there, gripping the letter in disbelief. What was I supposed to do? I started spiraling, thinking about what would happen if she actually went through with this. I pictured the two of us in a courtroom, facing off like strangers instead of family. The whole thing was so absurd, so heartbreaking, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But then, as I read the letter again, something struck me as odd. The whole thing was filled with spelling errors, sentences that didn't quite make sense, and details that seemed sloppy. The more I read, the less legitimate it looked. My suspicion grew, so I decided to check the contact information for the law firm listed at the bottom of the page. When I called, the phone just rang and rang. No voicemail, no answering service, nothing. I hung up and took a step back, suddenly realizing what was happening. This letter wasn't from a lawyer. It was fake. My own mom had sent me a fake lawsuit letter just to try to scare me. She'd gone through all the trouble of printing this official-looking letter, hoping I'd be intimidated enough to take down the video, or apologize, or do whatever she thought would fix her image. The realization left me with a weird mix of emotions. Relief, because I wasn't actually being sued by my own mother, but also deep, seething anger. Who does that? What kind of parent goes so far as to send a fake legal threat to their child? It felt like she was willing to do anything to get control over me again, to guilt me into submission, even if it meant stooping this low. I showed the letter to Sam, who was just as shocked as I was. We talked it over for hours, trying to make sense of why she'd go to such extreme lengths. Sam thought maybe she was just desperate, grasping at anything to get my attention and regain control of the narrative. And maybe that was true, but it didn't make it any less hurtful or absurd. I was already questioning how far she'd go to punish me, but this was something entirely different. I didn't want to just ignore it, not this time. I couldn't pretend this was just some harmless ploy or a desperate attempt to reach me. It felt like she was trying to manipulate me, to scare me into silence instead of actually listening or understanding how her actions had hurt me. And that's something I couldn't overlook. So after a few days of thinking it over, I decided I had to confront her. I needed to get this all out in the open and let her know that I was done with these games. I drove over to her house, feeling a strange combination of nerves and anger. I didn't know how this would go, but I was determined to speak my mind and draw a line once and for all. When she answered the door, she looked surprised to see me. Her first words were, "What are you doing here? You should be talking to my lawyer, not me." I nearly laughed out loud at the ridiculousness of it all. She was still putting on this act, pretending that her fake letter was real and that she had some righteous reason for sending it. I didn't play along. I looked her straight in the eye and told her I knew the letter was fake, that I'd done my research, and there was no lawyer, no lawsuit, no case. At first she tried to deny it, insisting she had no idea what I was talking about. But I wasn't buying it, and I laid out every detail: the spelling mistakes, the non-existent law firm, the unreachable phone number. Finally she dropped the act, let out a sigh, and admitted it. Fine. "You caught me," she said, sounding more annoyed than remorseful. "But what was I supposed to do? You humiliated me in front of everyone. You left me no other choice." Hearing those words, I felt a wave of sadness and anger all at once. She actually saw herself as the victim here, as if she had no part in creating this whole mess. I told her that suing me, especially with a fake lawsuit, wasn't going to solve anything. She'd gone out of her way to hurt me, all to protect her image, but she didn't see it that way. She doubled down, saying I'd been selfish, that I only thought about myself, and that I was trying to destroy her reputation out of jealousy. It was like talking to a wall. No matter how calmly I tried to explain, she wasn't listening. She had this story in her head where I was the villain, and she refused to see things any other way. I told her honestly that I hadn't done anything except speak my truth. I had every right to talk about how her actions had affected me, especially on a day as important as my wedding. But she was stuck on the idea that this was all about her image, her reputation. Finally, I'd had enough. I told her that unless she could apologize for the pain she'd caused me, I didn't want her contacting me anymore. I needed to protect myself, to stop letting her manipulations dictate my happiness and peace of mind. As hard as it was, I told her I was done with the guilt, the emotional blackmail, and the constant drama. And with that, I turned and left. Walking away from her house, I felt a strange sense of closure. It hurt to confront her like that, and to realize how far she was willing to go just to protect her image. But at the same time, I knew it was what I needed to do. For once, I had drawn a line, chosen myself, and refused to let her control my life. After that confrontation, a strange calm settled over me. I had finally done it. I had stood up to my mom, told her the truth without holding back, and put myself first. It wasn't easy, and part of me worried about the fallout. I had no idea if Mom would even attempt to reach out, or if she'd just write me off entirely. A big part of me wanted to hold on to hope, hoping that maybe she'd see things differently now, and maybe even reach out with some kind of apology or attempt to understand. But deep down, I knew better than to expect that. I was learning to let go of those kinds of expectations. The days turned into weeks, and while I didn't hear from Mom, I felt a weight lifting. The constant tension, the need to measure up, and the underlying guilt. It all started to fade. I focused on my new life with Sam, throwing myself into this fresh start, this second chance at finding joy without the constant need for my mom's approval. But just as I was starting to feel like I was moving on, I got another update on the situation. My sister Carla reached out, and it was clear she wasn't happy. She'd heard about my conversation with Mom, and while I thought she might have understood some of what I was going through, it was the opposite. Carla accused me of overreacting and disrespecting Mom. She went on about how Mom was just trying her best, and that I should be more understanding. It felt like a kick to the gut. She kept saying things like, "You know how Mom is, Jess. Why couldn't you just let it go?" She couldn't seem to grasp that it wasn't about Mom's personality quirks or about some one-off instance. This was about years of feeling overshadowed, ignored, and pushed aside. But to Carla, I was making a big deal out of nothing. She couldn't see that all I'd wanted was basic acknowledgement, just a tiny sliver of the love and support she got so easily. In a way, her response solidified everything I'd been feeling. It made me see that my mom's favoritism wasn't just a figment of my imagination, and it wasn't something that was ever going to change. My family had settled into their roles, and for them, I was just the other daughter, the one who was supposed to take a back seat. I realized then that no matter how many times I tried to explain, Carla would never see my side, and Mom would never change. From that point, I focused on distancing myself emotionally. I had spent my whole life bending over backward, trying to fit into a role they'd carved out for me, but I was done with that. Sam and I continued building our life together, and I poured myself into my work, my hobbies, and our shared dreams for the future. For the first time, I was allowing myself to be my own person without seeking anyone's approval. Then, out of the blue, about a month later, Mom sent me a long message. It wasn't an apology. She said she was hurt by the way things had turned out and that she never wanted this kind of distance between us. She said she missed me and that things felt different without me around. But again, there was no acknowledgement of what had actually caused the rift. She danced around the core issue, talking about family unity, forgiveness, and the importance of moving on. Part of me wanted to jump at the chance to reconnect. I missed her too, even though she'd caused so much pain. She's my mom, after all, and some part of me will always want that bond. But as I read her message, I realized she still didn't get it. She wasn't reaching out because she understood or wanted to make things right. She was reaching out because she wanted things to go back to how they used to be, where I kept quiet and played my role. I sat with her message for days, turning it over in my mind, wondering if maybe I could just let it all go for the sake of peace. But every time I thought about it, that familiar ache came back, the feeling of being overlooked, undervalued. I couldn't go back to that. It was like going backward into a place where I wasn't allowed to have my own voice, and I wasn't willing to do that anymore. I ended up writing her a response carefully, taking my time with each word. I thanked her for reaching out and told her I missed her too, but I couldn't just brush everything under the rug. I explained that I'd need her to actually acknowledge how her actions had affected me, and that I needed her to take responsibility if we were going to move forward. I told her that I was open to rebuilding our relationship, but it would have to be based on honesty, respect, and equality. The days after I sent that message were filled with a nervous kind of hope, wondering if maybe, finally, she would take that step and show some understanding. But her response was quick and short. She replied with a single line, "I'm sorry you feel that way, but I don't see what I did wrong, Dot." That was it. I knew in that moment that nothing would change. I couldn't keep pouring myself into a relationship where I wasn't seen or valued. So, with a heavy heart, I made peace with the decision to keep my distance. It wasn't easy, but I knew that staying close to her would only bring more pain. These days, Sam and I are focused on our lives, on our marriage, and on the dreams we're building together. I'm closer to some of my extended family members now, people who reached out during this whole ordeal and showed me genuine support. I'm building relationships with people who see me for who I am and who make me feel valued and appreciated. It's a slow process, but I'm finding my own family in new places, in people who lift me up rather than pull me down. Mom's absence still stings sometimes, especially during big moments or family gatherings. I'll always carry that longing for a mother's love, the kind of acceptance I watched Carla receive without even asking. But I've learned that I can't let that define me. I can't keep chasing after a version of her that only exists in my hopes. Life goes on. I'm learning to be okay with who I am and to love myself the way I always wished my mom would. And maybe one day she'll reach out with the understanding I need. But until then, I'm learning to let go and to create my own peace on my own terms. Thank you for being here to listen. It's helped more than I can say. Story 2. My parents made the decision to divorce when I was a little child. They couldn't make their lifestyles work together. And from what I now understand, they were constantly fighting. It sounds like their relationship wasn't working well because they were so different from one another. Rather than continue arguing and making everyone unhappy, or drag things through the courts and have a large, nasty struggle, They both decided it was better to part ways. They worked things out for themselves. It made sense for me to stay with my mom because my dad used to travel a lot for work. He consented to assist by paying child support. Even though I had little idea what was going on at the time, I eventually asked my mother the big question, why can't we all live together? On my 12th birthday. Like the families of some of my friends. Mom didn't mince words. She presented everything clearly. To be honest, at the time, it was a difficult pill to swallow. Knowing that my family will differ from certain others was painful. But now that I'm 15, I've come to terms with the status quo. That is, until a new event occurred. My mother made a new acquaintance. Ben was the man she began dating. After a period of discreet dating, they just became engaged. It came as a bit of a shock to me to learn that Ben and I had been dating for a year. We had only recently met. Mom indicated that she wanted to be certain of their connection before introducing us. She wanted me to have some time to adjust to Ben, as they are now going to move in together. In all honesty, Ben isn't all that horrible. Sometimes he can be a lot of fun, and he appears to understand when to stop. He doesn't push it and is considerate of the fact that I'm not searching for a new father. I admire how nice he is about keeping things cool between us. Then there is Jake, his kid, who is around my age. Jake and I knew one other via our parents, but this year we both began at the same high school since I moved to a different school. At school, things are rather weird. We behave as though we are strangers. I made several attempts to start a conversation, but he refused to listen. Every time, he simply shut me down. It's not only with me either. In addition, he treats my mother coldly. Given that his father was a widow, I believe he finds it difficult to see her with him. Perhaps he thinks my mother is attempting to take the place of his own mother, someone he clearly misses a great deal. But for whatever reason, he avoids us both, and it's obvious that he's unhappy with the state of affairs. To be honest, that irritates me, especially in light of my mother's efforts to make him feel accepted. Jake doesn't seem to care that she constantly goes out of her way to make things pleasant and involve him. So yes, I've come to despise the man, especially after witnessing the amount of work my mother does to avoid his attention. We were all gathered for supper on a typical Sunday night, attempting to conduct the customary family activity, you know? Jake suddenly drops a bomb at that point. He abruptly declares that he and his father are unable to move into our home. Everyone was a little taken aback. In an attempt to comprehend, my mother asked him why he didn't want to move in. You would assume that having a larger home than theirs would be advantageous, and ours is also much closer to the school. However, Jake, who is in his senior year of high school, is really passionate about his work. After graduating, he informs us all that he is really serious about attending art school. His interests extend beyond digital art. He desires to paint in the traditional sense. He has so been utilizing his home's garage as a private art studio. Since they only have one car and it parks in the driveway, there is plenty room. The problem is that he wouldn't have a place like that to practice his art if he moved in with us. He clarified that he must put in a great deal of extra work outside of his school hours in order to develop his portfolio for art school applications. Additionally, he thinks that he cannot just quit his employment there. It must be possible for him to work on it at home. This is when things start to go crazy. Without any delay, my mother recommends that Jake may use my room as a place to create paintings. Yes, you heard correctly. My chamber. She replied that I would be perfectly okay with simply giving up my own space. I must admit that I was rather angry and astonished. For a guy who doesn't even like us, why should I have to leave my room? When I'm pushed out of my own place, why does he get a bedroom plus a studio? I wasted no time in expressing my disapproval of this concept to everyone. My mother only shushed me when I told her outright that it was unfair. She assured me that we will discuss my predicament later. Really, it seemed like she was completely disregarding my feelings in order to please Jake. I arrived downstairs the following morning, well prepared to defend myself against my mother. I was prepared to state unequivocally that I would not give up my room, but before I could even begin, my mother began lecturing me about how I needed to learn to compromise and be more helpful. It's only for a few months, she said. She went on to say that things will return to normal when Jake left for college in approximately 8 or 9 months. Moving me into her own office was her major fix. She even said that she had installed a bed for me and that I might consider the kitchen and living room to be additions to my own room. I was in full awe as I stood there. Is it reasonable for my own mother to let me sleep in her office and then casually imply that the rest of the home may somehow compensate for the loss of my personal space? Here, I thought she was completely ignoring how I felt. She was behaving as though it didn't matter that I was about to be moved out of my room. All for a man who hasn't even showed us any regard. I had no intention of overlooking this. I couldn't afford to sit back and watch for a whole year while my life was completely upended. Not for someone who doesn't even value what we're doing for him in particular. At that point, despite the fact that my dad and my mom are no longer together, I felt compelled to include him. He continues to make child support payments and is often concerned about my well-being. I had a good feeling he would support me. I called my father and explained everything to him. I told him everything, including my mother's intention to move me into her office as a quick fix and her desire to force me out of my room to make place for Jake. As I had anticipated, my dad was quite supportive. He heard the entire tale, and by the time it was over, he was as furious as I was. On the phone, he assured me that I didn't need to worry about anything. He promised to speak with my mother and explain the unfairness of the entire idea. The conversation with him made me feel much better. Knowing that he was on my side and prepared to intervene was comforting. It's difficult to feel like you're being ignored in your own house. But having my dad by my side to support me during the struggle was really helpful. All I could do now was wait and see what they would say. I'm hoping my dad can convince her to let me retain my room. I had just returned from school when I walked into a complete meltdown at home a few days after I spoke with my dad. My mother was waiting for me, and she lost it the instant she saw me. She began attacking me as soon as I entered the room. She became very angry and began to shout at me for snitching to my dad behind her back. She said that I didn't mean to give the impression that I was being mistreated or anything. She claims that she has always made sure I had all I need and that this was simply one instance in which she required me to adjust to a new circumstance for her own benefit. However, she felt that I had completely deceived her. She was upset because it seemed that my father had phoned her and threatened to file a lawsuit to ensure that I was properly cared for, including having a room of my own. My mom's reaction was really strong, and the entire situation simply blew up far greater than I had anticipated. She believed that I had made a little family issue into a major one. I didn't even respond because I was so terrified by her rage and the way she was yelling. I simply turned around, hurried to my room, and burst into tears. Since then, I've been cooped up in my room since it's been difficult. I don't despise my mother. She's my mother after all. But it stung a lot what she said. She didn't seem to realize how much this was impacting me. She appears to be making a concerted effort to ensure that her stepson Jake feels accepted and appreciated, perhaps even at the expense of my feelings. In an attempt to appease everyone else, I feel like I'm being pulled into her. I'm now sitting here feeling conflicted about what is good and bad. I'm angry that I'm being asked to give up so much, but I also feel bad for stirring up issues. It's a disaster, and I'm just depressed and puzzled about it all. It seems like my mom isn't really understanding how all of this is being thrown on me, even though I know she's trying to do what she believes is best. I am caught in the midst, trying to find out how to deal with the notion that Jake's happiness is more important than mine. I simply have too much to handle, and I'm unsure of what to do next. Am I the jerk? Allow me to explain what has been happening over the last several weeks. When we last spoke, my mom had decided that Jake, her stepson, could use my room as his painting studio, and I was kind of freaking out. Yes, all of a sudden, the room I had occupied for almost my entire life was no longer mine. Things became much more difficult after I informed you guys about it. I was very affected by my mother's remarks. She pleaded with me to just handle it and provide a hand by creating room for Jake. The fact that I couldn't make her happy depressed me. I just made the decision to comply. I reasoned that things may improve if I demonstrated to her that I could manage it. But to be honest, it's been rather difficult. This is the current configuration. I now work at my mother's office instead of my room. I currently store my clothing there, as if it were an improvised wardrobe. I now sleep on the sofa in the living room and study at the kitchen table. I miss having my own place, and the bed isn't the most comfortable. Hugely. It feels different throughout the house, and not in a positive way. I really detest living this way. Furthermore, Jake isn't making matters any simpler by acting as like he owns the home. He acts as like he is the king or something, and that infuriates me. I got myself some ice cream the other day. You know, just looking for a little solace. Jake then proceeded to consume everything. That may sound absurd, but for me, it was the last straw. I'm really upset. I vented to my dad over the phone. All I needed was a conversation partner, someone who would comprehend. I ended up telling him everything that had been happening while weeping on the phone. After hearing about what I was going through, he also seemed genuinely unhappy. At that moment, he assured me that he would handle everything. I didn't know what he meant by saying, but what followed was definitely unexpected. Suddenly, a CPS Child Protective Services representative arrived at our home the next day. Right outside our house, he started asking me a lot of questions. Since he had no warrant or anything, my mom was quite careful and wouldn't let him inside, but she did allow him to speak with me. When he was gone, my mother was furious. She insisted on knowing who made the CPS call. I informed her that I assumed it was my dad watching out for me. At home, things are rather stressful right now. My mother confiscated my phone and informed me that I was not permitted to discuss the situation with anybody. She's furious, and I'm a little afraid of what will happen next. Since she confiscated my phone, I haven't been able to call my dad or anybody else. Since it's the only way I can communicate, I'm really writing this on the computer at my school right now. I quote, am at a loss and don't know what to do. Right now, I'm just trying to get by each day, but I'm hopeful that things will settle down soon. Regarding the entire CPS problem I brought up earlier, the intensity has only increased. In fact, the CPS agent returned with a warrant to conduct a thorough inspection of the residence. My dad arrived up with them as an additional surprise. He told me something incredibly important when we got a chance to speak, and he appeared to be really serious. In order for me to live with him, he said that he would formally adopt me. I was completely taken aback. Really, all I wanted from Ben was for him to assist in resolving my mom's issues, not to make our life into a full-fledged drama. But now things are going in a completely different direction than I had anticipated. The problem is that it's not as easy as it seems to move in with my dad. I would frequently be at his place alone because he still travels frequently for work. Yes, I am old enough to spend a couple nights alone myself. However, it goes beyond that. I just started my sophomore year, and his apartment is a far way from my school. I can't simply change schools in the middle of the year. That would further complicate matters. It would be a nightmare to change schools. Since everyone has already established their cliques and cliques, I would be the new kid, which essentially makes you the target of bullying or exclusion. Furthermore, I might not even get accepted into the classes I desire. If no one else wants to accept the remaining topics, I could be forced to take them. Moving with my dad then. Not a good idea at all. I attempted to explain everything to my father. He can't just take me out of my life like that, I informed him bluntly. Even if living out of the living room office wasn't ideal, I insist, Ben, that I was getting along just fine. But the whole thing appeared to trap him. It's not really up to me anymore once CPS gets involved like this, he stated. He must do it, or it might look awful for us both. I'm now forced to hope that CPS won't simply take me from my house. The life I'm leading and what my dad believes is saving me are at odds with one another. This is still my life, despite its imperfections. I feel that no matter what I say, things are going forward without my control, and it's really stressful. I'm now attempting to express my opinions on this whole mess in the hopes that someone would hear me and realize that I don't require rescuing. Simply provide Ben your support. I'm simply wishing for the best and crossing my fingers as I get ready for whatever comes next. Okay, so in the midst of all the turmoil surrounding the CPS issue, there is finally some positive news to offer. To my great relief, they were unable to locate any concrete evidence that I was being abused. In addition, my mother allowed me to return to my former room, which at this time felt like a huge win. This is what transpired. The people at CPS were attempting to argue that, emotionally, I wasn't living in a stable setting. They said that I was being thrown off balance and that things were difficult for me because of my mom's rapid changes in her life. such as how quickly she became serious with Ben. However, my mother was able to make everything obvious. In fact, having to undergo a psychological examination helped her win the lawsuit against the allegations. I supported her throughout this debacle, which made her case much stronger. I had a serious conversation with my father as well. He kind of overreacted by calling CPS without warning me, and I had to let him know that. I mean, all I was concerned about was losing my room, and he went all out and implicated the entire system instead of simply having a conversation. I feel a little guilty about how I handled it in retrospect. He shouldn't always accept my words at face value, especially when I'm very unhappy, I informed him, feeling like I make a big deal out of nothing and seem like a crybaby. I now understand that I exaggerated a lot of things which led to this situation. I even went back and expressed my regret to Ben and my mother for all the trouble I had created. They didn't truly deserve to go through all of that, and the entire situation makes me feel somewhat ashamed. Now, after everything that has transpired, I'm simply feeling so uncomfortable. I just want to go away for a while. I feel so ashamed of everything that I could just hide and bury myself in a dump. I'm feeling that way even though I know it's not actually feasible. I suppose my only goal for now is to get over everything, keep quiet, and concentrate on returning things to normal, or as normal as possible. After all, it all began a few weeks ago with this drama post. Since our parents' divorce, Jake has been somewhat icy and aloof until he abruptly changed his mind, but not in a positive way. He's made school a nightmare for me, as if he's switched a switch. Initially, it was just small jabs here and there, sarcastic remarks, eye rolls, and snickers with his cronies as he passed me in the corridor. Things. Yes, that was bothersome, but I thought I could put up with it. I simply tried to ignore him and keep my head down. However, things became more intense and intimate. He started insulting me and calling me names. Not just any names, but ones that truly irritated me. After waiting for me to pass by, he would shout something loud enough for everyone to hear, but not so loud that it would be difficult for me to reply without coming across as overly dramatic. In a terribly unpleasant manner, it was ingenious. Then he began circulating gossip about me. I was completely unprepared for this one. Naturally, it spread like wildfire when he told a few others that I was crushing on one of the popular men in our school. Everyone appeared to be talking about it in whispers and laughing by noon. It was embarrassing. My cheeks were burning before I could even glance at the man. He was obviously aware of the rumor as well, since he continued staring at me strangely. Jake didn't stop there, though. By inviting other children to participate in the bullying, he further elevated his game. He was the ringleader, it seems. All of a sudden, there were some children who found it amusing to ruin my life. When teachers weren't there, they would purposefully bump into me, knock my books out of my hands, and say dumb things. Everyone seemed to have turned against me without cause, like if I were in some kind of nightmare. I would return home feeling worse and worse every day. For the first time in my life, I began to dread going to school. Learning has always been enjoyable to me. Liked spending time with friends, and I even really liked some of my lessons. However, it suddenly seemed like stepping into a trap while entering the school. Last Thursday was the day I broke. When I got home, I immediately went to my room and started crying. I was at my breaking point, the ongoing stress and the sense that I must always look out for myself. It was simply too much. I decided I had to inform my mother when I had cooled down a little. She had to be aware of the severity of the situation. I then went to her. I informed her about everything, including the stories Jake was spreading, the names he was calling me, and the way other students were treating me. I described how I was feeling and how school had turned into a terrible place that I detested attending. I thought she would comprehend and perhaps even assist me in determining what to do. However, I wasn't prepared for her reaction. She paid attention, yes. However, she didn't appear to take it as seriously as I did. "We're only children, and children experience these things," she informed me. "Together, we will overcome this obstacle." She seemed to be dismissing it, as if she was unaware of how deeply it affected me. She said I should be patient with Jake, and that perhaps he was simply going through a difficult period due to the changes in the family. Is the patient? That suggestion was difficult to process. When every day seemed like a struggle, how could I have patience? It felt so unjust. She was pleading with me to endure it, To endure the pain. Feeling unsupported by my mother, I quietly began to consider alternative approaches to deal with the problem. I thought about speaking with a school counselor or instructor. They might be able to take action. Perhaps they would pay attention and consider it. Then, though, I was concerned about making matters worse. What if it didn't work out? What if Jake chose to take revenge after learning that I had snitched? I was sufficiently alarmed by that thinking to hold my tongue for a little while longer. I attempted to be quiet at school the following day in the hopes that it would go away, but it didn't. Jake pretended to trip me in front of everyone during lunch. I went down. My meal spilled everywhere, and the ensuing laughing was unbearable. I felt completely alone, ashamed, and devastated. As I got up, it occurred to me that perhaps this would not simply go away, and that I would need to take more extreme action than merely crossing my fingers. That entire weekend, I considered my alternatives. I could continue to attempt to stay out of sight and avoid Jake. Who was I kidding, though? It wasn't functioning. I could speak with a teacher, but there was a serious chance of things getting worse. Alternatively, I might attempt to speak with Jake directly and try to understand why he was acting in this way. However, the idea of facing him was intimidating. I still hadn't decided by Monday. I couldn't decide whether to be afraid or to hold out hope that it may just cease on its own. However, I felt in my heart that I couldn't continue living this way. I needed to get out. I needed to figure out how to defend myself. Either that, or I would be crushed by this circumstance. And so here I am, still caught up in this mess, still attempting to decide what to do. The decision carries a lot of weight, and the paralyzing fear of making everything worse is overwhelming. However, I am aware that I cannot simply stand by and watch this go on. I must take action. All I want is to know what the appropriate thing was. I finally had enough of Jake's constant bullying, which seemed to become worse no matter how hard I tried to ignore or avoid him. I felt completely trapped after enduring the emotional upheaval for so long and failing to find a workable answer for my earlier attempts to cope with it, especially in light of my mom's somewhat contemptuous reaction. At that point, I felt it was appropriate to include my father in the discussion in the hopes that he may have some influence. I recall taking up my phone and dialing my dad's number with trembling palms. Not only was I anxious to inform him, when he replied, I was afraid to acknowledge my helplessness. I told him what I knew about the derogatory names Jake had given me. Jake's influence caused other kids to regard me differently, according to the rumors he propagated. At first, Dad listened calmly as he took in the seriousness of what I was saying. I felt a little more at ease simply knowing he was there, listening to me, and his stillness stood in stark contrast to the turmoil I was describing. He answered right away and firmly. I hadn't heard him sound that angry in a long time. At the circumstance, not at me. He said he would visit the following day to speak with Ben and Jake face to face. With a mix of relief and trepidation, I hung up. Help was on its way, which was a relief, and anxiety on the possible consequences of this altercation. I thought the following day was the longest day of my life. My thoughts kept straying to the upcoming meeting at home while I went through my school routine robotically. My stomach was in knots by the time I returned. Soon after Dad arrived, there was a noticeable change in the mood at home. Mom appeared nervous and unsure about Dad's role. I was simply preparing myself for whatever was going to happen. Upon gathering everyone, Dad didn't mince words. He presented what I had told him as facts that needed to be addressed, rather than merely allegations. Jake first laughed awkwardly and turned to Ben for support as he attempted to dismiss the charges. However, my father was not amenable to it. He insisted on responsibility and honesty. Jake's attitude gradually altered as I stood by his side, buoyed by his presence, but terrified of the possible backlash when challenged directly, and unable to find an ally in his father. I watched with a mixture of admiration and horror seething inside me. He renounced his deception and acknowledged some of his past actions. Even if he didn't apologize, the fact that he was acknowledged seemed like a minor win in and of itself. Ben, who had remained silent, suddenly said something. He gave my dad his word that he would deal with the matter and ensure that it wouldn't become worse. Although he sounded serious, I had some reservations about whether his statements would actually be followed through on. Mom came up to me after they departed. She was clearly unhappy. In addition to the bullying, I also brought Dad into what she saw as a family matter that we could resolve among ourselves. She believed that by intensifying the issue, I had betrayed her. She didn't appear to really understand my point of view, which was that I felt desperate and unsupported. I was extremely hurt by the breach that resulted from the heavy quiet that followed the conversation's conclusion. The following few days at school revealed a discernible shift despite the uneasiness at home. Jake didn't approach, the overt bullying stopped, and the rumors stopped spreading. Jake's conduct seemed to have been reset, or at least put on hold as a result of Dad's intervention. The classmates who had participated in the mocking were perplexed by the abrupt change and eventually ceased their jeering. It felt strange and comforting to feel this sudden tranquility. I didn't have to tense up to avoid the next joke or insult as I moved through the hallways. I noticed that I could concentrate better in class, and even started to renew some friendships that had cooled off at the height of the bullying. As I thought back on these incidents, I saw how important it was to have someone stand up for me. Dad's action went beyond merely putting an end to the bullying. It was a show of solidarity that I much needed. It made me realize how important it is to defend oneself, but it also made me realize how important it is to have allies who will support you in doing so. Even though things have improved, a part of me is still cautious because I'm afraid the peace may not last. After months of stress, I'm gradually regaining my confidence and attempting to return to my regular self. In addition, I'm trying to patch up my tense connection with my mother. It's challenging because of the strong emotions and the misconceptions caused by our respective behaviors, which require cautious handling. I hope that this conclusion will be a turning point in our blended family structure as well as in my relationship with Jake, as I continue to negotiate these complicated familial dynamics. Even though there will certainly be challenges along the way, I feel more prepared to handle whatever comes next, because to my dad's encouragement and my newly discovered resilience. It's been quite the journey, and although I'm cautiously optimistic, I'm also cautiously afraid of what lies ahead. I look forward to more tranquil days and a more seamless trip in the future, when I can concentrate on being a teenager and a student, instead of always protecting myself against unjustified assaults. I appreciate your patience with me during this, and let's hope for more robust and encouraging reports in the future. Let's start by discussing what happened just after my dad's intervention. The bullying stopped very immediately. The rumors that used to reverberate through the school corridors stopped when Jake put an end to all types of harassment. It seemed unreal how suddenly there was tranquility. It seemed remarkably calm to stroll inside the school after months of fear and worry. Every day, I absorbed in the satisfaction of not having to deal with pointed fingers, murmurs, or laughter. I could finally breathe again, like though I had been holding my air for months. But the discomfort at home and the strain between Jake and me didn't go away right away after the bullying stopped. We had agreed to coexist peacefully in the same areas, an unwritten ceasefire between us. At school, though it was brittle. At home, Jake and I kept our conversations neutral and minimum, navigating our encounters with deliberate indifference and recognizing one another's existence only when absolutely required. Slowly, the dynamics were changing. As the weeks stretched into months, my mom, who had been furious about my dad being involved, started to see the improvements in my behavior. She struck up a discussion that I had been secretly hoped would happen. When I first told her about the bullying, she sat me down one evening and apologized for not acting more forcefully. She acknowledged that she became aware of the extent of my anguish and the significance of her responsibility in ensuring my well-being after witnessing the change in me after the intervention. The lingering scars between us were soothed by this discourse. We established the groundwork for a revitalized relationship built on more respect and understanding by discussing the need of candid communication and reciprocal assistance. During this period, Ben's position within the family also changed. As my mom's companion and a source of stability in the home, he was more involved and present. Even if they were a little awkward, the family activities he led helped close the distance between Jake and me. Despite their subtlety, these attempts were not ignored. They assisted in melting the ice that had formed between Jake and me, turning our grudging cohabitation into a cautious one. As I think back on these changes, I've learned to value the complexity of family interactions, particularly in mixed families. Every member has unique expectations, emotional baggage, and experiences. It takes perseverance, sensitivity, and a steadfast dedication to finding common ground to navigate these divides. These events have taught me many valuable lessons. I discovered the value of advocacy, having someone defend you when you feel helpless, and speaking out for yourself once you have a voice. I gained knowledge about resilience, which is the capacity to face hardship head-on and come out stronger on the other side. Most significantly, though, I gained knowledge about the value of second chances and forgiveness. The goal of forgiving Jake was to free myself from the weight of animosity, not to justify his behavior. I sense a cautious optimism about the future. I know that the peace we have won is fragile and will take constant work to preserve. As we continue to navigate our shared life, I am also aware that there may be new obstacles to overcome. But now I'm more prepared to handle these difficulties. As I complete this chapter, I want to express my thanks to everyone who has shared in this journey, supported by my family's support and the inner strength I have gained. My friends and family, as well as those of you reading this, have sent words of encouragement. It has been therapeutic to share this story, and your comments have been consoling and uplifting. In the hope that the worst of the storms are over, we look forward to the future and the lessons that lie ahead. Let's go with the knowledge that, even if the path may not always be easy, it can be covered with the correct assistance and mindset. I appreciate you being a part of my tale, and we can write more uplifting chapters in the future. Story 3. I confided in my partner about my mental health issues. She told me this after placing me on psychiatric hold. So, no, I'm not exactly in the best position at the moment. In the age of 29, I work in a job that should provide me with a sense of purpose and help me pay my bills. Let's be honest though, it hardly does either. I'm working so hard. For what purpose? To make ends meet. I'm very certain that many readers understand what I'm saying. You seem to be working tirelessly in the hopes that things would become simpler. However, they don't. And that's simply life for some folks, isn't it? However, things have changed for me recently. Much darker. I have no idea when this entire mental chaos began. I would want to tell that I was a really happy guy who woke up to a horrible day and that everything went south. It's not that easy, though. It feels more like a sluggish creep into this strange, shadowy abyss. One day, for example, you discover that the ideas you're thinking aren't typical of a male. You know, what's the point? They ask. And the fact that I don't genuinely want to harm myself makes it scarier. Even when I don't want to, my thoughts continue to wander there, even if I'm not actively planning anything. It seems as though it will ambush me while I'm not looking. Suicidal ideation is the term used to describe these ideas, which essentially mean that they spontaneously appear. Since some of you may not have been there and it may seem too dramatic, I will attempt to create a picture for you, even though I have no intentions to do anything at all. I feel like I have this burden on my mind all the time. On certain days, I would get up, go to work, and simply go through the motions. However, it's like a switch being flicked within. It's all numb, as if I'm simply navigating the day automatically. The fact that no one can see it makes it strange. I'm just the same man showing up and doing my work to everyone else. On the inside, though, everything seems heavy and dark. And I can't get rid of it no matter what I do. To be honest, I believed I could simply keep going. After all, I've handled stress before, right? However, this is not the same. Usually I just focus on my work, stay busy, attempt to ignore the negative things and hope they go away. But no matter how hard I tried or how much I tried to divert my attention, these ideas kept coming back. Maintaining a cover on a pot that is already boiling over is like that. It will ultimately pour, even if you can keep it contained for a time. At the darkest moments, I would also have these ideas. It's like if I'm standing at work, meant to be paying attention, and all of a sudden my thoughts are wandering about how simple it would be to simply vanish. What the heck is wrong with me? I would thought as I snapped out of it. However, it did occur once more, and once more. It begins to play with your mind. When I go home, I would just sit there and try to understand why I can't get over it, why I can't simply be happy, or at least normal. I'm losing this never-ending mental war. It may sound dramatic, but if you've been there before, you understand. And if you haven't, believe me when I say that I wouldn't want anyone to experience that. It feels as though you are imprisoned in an unseen cage. You can't escape every day no matter what you do. It's basically a battle to keep moving on and to act as though nothing is wrong. You know deep down that it's not. And the most terrifying aspect, I kept it a secret, not a soul. Who wants to hear that after all? That wants to be the one that people believe is broken when they look at you. In the hopes that it would simply go away, I held it all in. Then the darkest days arrived. These are the ones that I remember the most. After a long day, I would return home fatigued and simply sit there thinking nothing, staring at the wall, simply gazing. People would try to contact me on my phone, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I felt as like I was depleting all of my energy simply to get through the day, leaving nothing for other people. This voice in the back of my mind would murmur that it would be simpler to just give up as I sat in quiet, sometimes for hours at a time. The notion was there all the while, like some shadow I couldn't get rid of, but I never really did it. I began to think that perhaps I couldn't do this alone after a few months of this. That was a difficult pill to swallow, I must say. I've always been the self-sufficient person who handles everything on his own. However, this was unique. I couldn't ignore it or just brush it off. I thus made the decision to open out to my partner after much internal debate. We've been dating for 4 years and she's always supported me. She would be the one to understand, wouldn't she? We're sitting on the couch one evening watching a pointless television program, and I made the decision to pursue it. I explained to her that I had been experiencing difficulties lately, that I felt down, and that I had been thinking these things. That was one of the most difficult things I have ever done, I must say. I was hardly able to speak. I was so incredibly concerned about her reaction. However, I couldn't trust anybody else with this. She simply sat there listening, and I reasoned that perhaps this would be beneficial. I continued to clarify, attempting to convince her that I had no plans. That all I needed was someone to listen to me. She then gave a nod, claimed to have comprehended. In fact, I felt quite relieved, as if I had finally figured out how to get out of this rut. Perhaps this will be all right, I thought. I might be all right. In hindsight, perhaps I shouldn't have had such high expectations. She's only 22 years old, so she probably didn't know how to handle this kind of situation. However, I honestly believed that informing her was the proper thing to do at that moment, and for the first time in a long time, I felt as though I might not be so alone in this. I believed that the first step to recovery was opening up, and that I had at last figured out how to deal with these ideas and go on. However, as I had discovered, it was not that easy. I continued where I had left off, eventually confiding in my partner. To be honest, after telling her everything, I experienced a strange sensation of relief. Perhaps this was the first step in rescuing myself from that state of mind. However, I was completely unprepared for what came next. I think I was feeling lighter after our conversation. I thought I would go get some food and take a short break. I assured her that I would return immediately. The trek down the street was brief, something to divert my attention. I believed that everything between us was good, as if we had breached a wall or something. I didn't think she would take any severe action. However, by the time I returned, everything had changed in a way I could never have predicted. I saw 2 police cars parked outside my house as soon as I pulled into my driveway. And I'm completely bewildered as I sit there in my car and stare at these flashing lights. My initial assumption was that there could have been an emergency in the area. However, as soon as I stepped out of the car, one of the cops came up to me and seemed to recognize me right away. "What's my name?" I'm simply nodding when he asks. None of it is being processed yet. My heart is pounding and I'm trying to think of every scenario that may have gone wrong. "We received a call from someone who is worried about your safety," he continues. Correct. Then it made sense. I understood this had nothing to do with the outer world. It has to do with me. My girlfriend had reported me to the police, and all of a sudden the sense of relaxation I had experienced moments before was gone. I felt as though I had allowed her into my thoughts. She had betrayed my confidence by using it against me. I made an effort to clarify to the cops that there had been a mistake. I explained to them that I was simply going through a difficult period and had no intention of harming myself. And in the hopes that it might help, I discussed it with her. However, None of it was being heard by them. They insisted repeatedly that it was for my benefit and that they were there to assist. I was angry at this point. What could I do, though? It wasn't really up for debate when they informed me that I would be sent to the hospital for a mental examination. I made an effort to protest, but it was pointless. "Look, we're just here to make sure you're safe," one of them stated. Secure? After enjoying some food in my car, I was now expected to constitute a threat to myself. It was illogical. However, none of that mattered to them. They simply did what they were told. Then I realize, who else did she inform if the police are here? My phone buzzes just in time. My mother is frantically texting me, asking me why I'm in such a horrible place, what's going on, and other things. As it happens, my girlfriend had also phoned my parents. She probably assumed they would agree with her choice to call the police. Perhaps I needed to think this way or whatever. However, all I experienced was a surge of rage and irritation. My fiancé, my family, and the individuals who were meant to support me had all somehow become, I don't even know what, but certainly not the help I believed I required. So there I am, being led to the hospital by the police. Despite the fact that I did nothing wrong, I'm sitting in the back of a police cruiser like some criminal. I'm furious. I'm more upset with my girlfriend for placing me in this situation than I am with myself for believing that I could trust anyone given what I was going through. When we get at the hospital, they lead me to a separate room where the nurse is waiting. I sat there thinking, this isn't real, as she begins to ask me a lot of questions about my mental health, how I'm feeling, and other things. It feels like a twisted joke, the whole thing. I informed the nurse up front that this was all a mistake that had been exaggerated and that I had no intention of injuring myself. "Well, we'll need to do a full evaluation to make sure the whole time," she adds, nodding. All I could think of was how things simply got out of hand. In the hopes that it might help, I had opened up to my partner, and here I was, being treated as though I were a threat to myself, in a chilly clinical room. They stole everything, including my wallet and phone. The fact that I was honest for once made me feel as though I had somehow lost control of my own life. After all, isn't that what everyone advises? If you're having trouble, talk to someone. But see where I ended up? The waiting game, of course, began. For hours, I sat in this little uncomfortable room, doing nothing but reliving every single detail of that discussion with my girlfriend in my mind. I kept asking myself whether there was anything I could have said that would have prevented this series of events, but it simply didn't add together, regardless of how I attempted to interpret it. I believed I had made it apparent to her that I was not actively planning anything. Why contact the police then? Why would I call my parents? At some point, why blow everything up? The entire assessment procedure began when a doctor arrived. He questioned me about my thoughts, how long I had been feeling this way, and other things while remaining composed. I gave the best response I could, but explaining anything is difficult. You hardly comprehend yourself. Everything was clear that he didn't fully understand everything since I could see him taking notes and occasionally glancing up. I felt much worse when he continued to ask me questions in this cold, professional manner, as if I were just another case. He was attempting to cross something off his list. By the time the initial assessment was eventually completed, I was psychologically and physically exhausted. I simply accepted that no one was going to truly understand me, since I didn't have the energy to constantly expressing myself. They had no desire to assist. They were only carrying out their assigned tasks, protocol, methods, checklists. To them, I was simply another number. I won't tell lies. I felt totally deceived sitting in that room with nothing to do but look at the walls. I couldn't stop thinking about my family, my fiancé, and the individuals who should have cared. I had faith in them, became more open than I had ever been. All I needed was someone to truly listen to me, yet here I was, isolated in a sterile room, being treated like a threat to myself. Rather, I was given a label and placed in a category. I'm now trapped in this predicament because of them. I wasn't even shocked when they informed me that I would need to remain for more observation. Everything seemed to have taken on a life of its own. Furthermore, I was unable to stop it. Feeling disheartened, I sat there wondering if I would ever be able to view these individuals in my life in the same light. The experience of being admitted to a mental health facility, particularly when it's against your choice, is beyond words. I became aware of how little power I still had the moment they stole my wallet and phone. Hospitals are intended to help you. Isn't that what you think they are? Well, that didn't feel helpful here. Prison was how it felt. It was dark and chilly, as if the whole structure was intended to suck up your remaining hope, and they acted as though you were already irreparably damaged. They finally took me to this small room, which appeared to have not been renovated since the 1980s, after what seemed like hours of waiting. It had a chair, a small table, and a single bed with a thin mattress. The walls had a faded beige tone that was flaking in places, and they smelled like bleach mixed with something rancid. I sat on the bed and looked at the walls, trying to figure out how I got here. The employees, they only spoke to you when it was absolutely necessary. They didn't seem to perceive you as a human being. They were just handling another case. One of the nurses shrugged when I tried to inquire how long I would need to remain here. Muttered something about assessments and turned to go. No actual answers, no explanations, just blank icy glances and people walking around as if you don't exist. The worst part followed. My roommate, not him, I'm not sure what I was expecting. The man was certain that he was a prophet, god or something. He was always muttering to himself and even yelling at the walls. He smashed his head against the wall the first night I was there, leaving red stains behind when I woke up. The personnel dismissed my inquiry for his well-being as if it were a trivial matter. Sometimes he does it. Totally unaffected, one of them said. That's how the entire experience was. There was no solitude, no tranquility, and nothing that gave you a sense of humanity. Sleep was impossible since the light was on all the time, and someone came to check on you every half hour. I would lie there, fatigued but unable to fall asleep, as I listened to the hum of fluorescent lights, the shuffle of other patients down the hall, and the creaking of doors. Every sound, every shadow. It seemed as though the location was intended to make you tense. Meals were even more terrible. They claimed that the insipid gray mash that served as breakfast, lunch, and supper was balanced. At first, I made an effort to eat, but I was hardly able. About a day later, I simply gave up. What was the purpose? I had the impression that I had done something wrong and was being punished, despite the fact that I had only opened out to someone I believed I could trust. Then came the medications. Man, oh man, the medications. Despite my repeated assurances that I posed no threat to myself, the physicians had determined that I required medication to help me relax. It didn't matter though. I was only another item on their list, and they had their system. They gave me these medications, but they didn't even explain what they were. You either take these, or we'll have to use other measures, they said, staring at me when I refused to take them. In essence, if I didn't comply, they would force-feed me the food. Yes, I did take them, and whatever they gave me, let me tell you, it was cruel. After 30 minutes, I felt as though cotton had been wrapped around my brain. It was all sluggish and hazy. I was unable to think clearly, not even able to form a whole phrase. I felt as though I was floating outside of myself, seeing this entire horror play out while being helpless to stop it. They would refer to it as treatment, but it felt to me like they were taking away what little power I still had. I was there for 3 days. I did nothing but sit in that dark chamber and look at the walls for 3 long, awful days. I didn't want to chat, despite the staff's best efforts. I could tell they weren't paying attention. Not at all. They didn't care that I had previously given them the truth. They just had to cope with me as another body. I remained silent, clammed up, and simply waited for it to end. My parents and girlfriend paid us a visit on the second day. I didn't want to see them, but I could see them through my room's little window, conversing with one of the nurses, who was presumably trying to get a glimpse of me. I had had enough of them. They were the ones that brought me here and determined that I needed this, without even requesting my opinion. I just shook my head and expressed my disinterest when the nurse informed me that I had guests. I didn't care that I could see the nurse's face fall, as if she thought I was being ungrateful or something. I was furious with them all for assuming they knew what was best for me. I'm upset because I trusted them enough to be vulnerable, only to get the worst conceivable backlash. They didn't comprehend, and I wasn't sure I wanted them to at that moment. In that location, time seemed odd. Everything seemed to slow down and blend together. Days seemed to drag on for hours, and I felt more and more confined each moment I spent there. It was like to being trapped in a twisted form of purgatory with no way out. Knowing that they would ultimately have to let me go was the only thing that kept me going. There was nothing wrong with me. They had no evidence to keep me there, and I posed no threat to myself. I was so exhausted at the end, both physically and psychologically, that I hardly remember myself. I felt as though all of my inner strength had been sapped away. I was informed I would be discharged shortly after the doctors ultimately determined they didn't have enough to keep me any longer. Even so, though, they pretended to be helping me in some way, as if I should be appreciative that they were letting me leave. I simply wanted to get out, was all I could think. I wanted to leave that location and those individuals behind. They had made an already difficult period in my life even worse, to put it as far away from the entire experience as possible. All because I made a mistake in my trust, and I decided on one thing as they led me out of that room and down those desolate halls for the final time. I had finished them all. I was not as relieved as I had anticipated when they eventually let me go. I felt as though whatever part of me that ought to have been thankful for my freedom had been left behind in that mental hospital. They gave me my phone, money, and belongings, as if I were a child who had just received a punishment and was now free to return to the outdoors. But I wanted to go out as soon as I grabbed my belongings. I didn't even turn around or speak to any of the employees. I had had enough of them and that location. Naturally, they were outside waiting for me, my girlfriend and my parents. Each of them had a look that suggested both relief and concern. And it was already visible to me. "Are you all right?" they asked. "Did it also help?" Their faces were filled with emotions. I wasn't going to play into that, though. I had endured enough already. There was nothing that I owed them. As soon as they noticed me, they all began chatting at once. My mother wanted to know how I was doing, while my girlfriend was talking up how much she had missed me and how happy she was that I was safe. My dad attempted to give me one of those strange side hugs. Right now, to be honest, I simply couldn't handle it. I had a surge of rage within me. I just saw them make that decision for me, deciding without even listening what was best. They had tossed me in as if I were a project that needed to be fixed. They now wanted me to act as though nothing was wrong. I remained silent with them, not one. I simply pushed them aside and turned to go. I didn't stop when they called my name and inquired about my whereabouts. I was too busy thinking about other things to give a damn at that moment. I hardly noticed that it had begun to rain as I continued to walk. That felt perfect somehow. As if the entire environment was in sync with my mood. Heavy, gray, chilly. The rain pouring through my garments didn't even bother me. Getting wet seemed to be the least of my troubles after everything. Before I returned to my apartment, I must have traveled a good 3 kilometers. I hadn't even considered calling a cab or finding a transportation, let alone stopping once. I simply continued to walk, allowing the hurt and rage to propel me ahead till I returned. I was tired and soaked by the time I got to my door, but for some reason, the walk seemed to help me decompress. Or perhaps I buried everything so deeply that I was unable to feel anything at all. I didn't care either way. All that mattered was that I was at home. My girlfriend was following me as I entered. She had followed me back, but I hadn't even realized it. However, she was drenched and staring at me as if I were a wounded animal. "We must speak," she said. However, I had finished speaking. When I first opened myself to her, I had already said all that was important. And see where I ended up? I didn't want to listen to her defenses or explanations. None of it was anything I wanted to hear. "We're done," I murmured, staring her in the eye. In that very moment, no justification. Don't attempt to lessen the blow. I didn't have the energy to play nice since I was worn out and depleted. She broke down in tears and said she had simply wanted to assist me and had done what she believed was right. Her solution, however, had been to put me in a mental health facility without even asking what I wanted. How might that be helpful? With someone who could make decisions for me like that without even having a meaningful conversation, how was I expected to feel safe? I gave her till the end of the week to gather her belongings and leave my place. I didn't care at the time, but it seemed cruel. She continued to talk about how much she cared for me and to attempt to explain. I had heard enough, though. I had faith in her. I assumed she would be sympathetic to my plight. Instead, she completely upended my life. Some could argue that I was being too harsh on her, but they would understand if they had experienced what I had. You can't just put someone in that situation and hope that things would return to normal. I sat in my empty apartment and stared at the walls when she eventually departed. It was very, very silent. And I let myself to feel the weight of everything for the first time. The treachery, all the hatred, all of it came at me at once. Although I felt alone, it was somewhat preferable than acting as though I was surrounded by people who didn't genuinely care about my desires. None of them had genuinely asked me what I needed, even though they had all seemed to be helpful. That decision had just been made for me. I wasn't even there. My folks' texts began to ping across my phone, most likely concerned that I would break up with my partner in that way. I didn't even glance at them though. I was finished. I had forgotten what it was to genuinely look out for myself since I had spent so much time trying to please other people and play nice. And now, following all of that, their explanations and guilt trips were too much for me to handle. My parents persisted in phoning me throughout the course of the following several days, sending me lengthy, guilt-ridden emails telling me that my girlfriend was only attempting to assist and that I should forgive her. Give her another opportunity. They failed to grasp it. They would never know what it was like to be imprisoned there and treated as though I were flawed simply because I was having difficulties. I felt as though they had removed the only thing I had left, even though I knew they believed they were doing morally. My freedom to choose what I wanted for myself and discard it. My girlfriend had packed up and departed at the end of the week. I didn't bid them farewell, didn't give her a glance as she left the room. I had moved on from that. I had made my decision, and she had made hers. I felt as though a piece of me had perished in that mental health unit, the portion that thought others might comprehend me without passing judgment or attempting to manipulate me. People who believed they understood better than I did what was best for me were unnecessary. I had no idea how liberating it would be to finally create that boundary and let those who had wronged me know that they no longer had the power to determine my life. I was alone, yes, but at least I was alone how I wanted to be. As odd as it may sound, that brought me a sense of calm that I hadn't had in a while. I'm finally sitting here alone now, and I can't get this question out of my head. Was the asterisk me an asterisk? Cole? I mean, I know that everything is messed up. I recognize that they believed they were assisting me. My parents and my girlfriend? They cared, which is why they did what they did. All right, I understand. However, it still seems like they all utterly destroyed me and all I needed and desired. And now all I have left is this enormous mess, and everyone tells me I'm mistaken. They must have believed they knew best. In particular, my girlfriend. I shared some really private information with her, things I hadn't even truly told myself. That gave her the go-ahead to call the police on me. Who, after all, does that? She was aware that I had no immediate plans. Instead of paying attention to what I needed, I informed her quite plainly that I was having difficulties, but that I was not in any real danger. She simply lost it and included my family as well, assuming that would be beneficial in some way. And my folks, well, they pretended to be astonished. They seemed unable to comprehend that I was experiencing this. However, I'm not sure. I got the feeling that they ought to have recognized the warning indications. They are aware of how difficult work has been and how my bills have been piling up. How difficult every day has been recently. That aspect of my life isn't anything I'm concealing. I mean, I barely make ends meet. They were aware of that. They were aware of how hard my work has been, and they all behaved as like I were a problem that needed to be fixed, rather than simply someone who needed some understanding, when I eventually reached out because it was getting too heavy. I quote V, now disconnected everyone. I've banned my parents' numbers and my partner is no longer with me. I made it plain that I would report them to the police for trespassing if they persisted. Yes, I am aware that sounds severe. I know that I probably sound like a crazy man to other people, but you would understand if you had experienced what I had. Things change when the people you trust the most determine that locking you away is the best way to assist. It alters your perception of both them and yourself. Then there's the financial aspect of it. Because my brief visit to the psychiatric hospital was obviously not covered by insurance. Now, on top of everything else, I have to pay $10,000 for something I didn't need, didn't ask for, and never wanted. My blood boils every time I consider it, as if I were already drowning in debt and fighting to make ends meet. And since my girlfriend believed she was saving me, I now have a huge debt hanging over my head. I would weep if I didn't laugh. To be honest, I keep hearing that I should contact the hospital and request a lower bill. I understand. Although it's sound advice, I am terrified at the thought of ever having to deal with them again. I'd rather not speak to anyone there. I don't want to go through that again. That location seems to have left a scar, and the bill just reopens whenever I consider taking action. It may sound absurd, yet it is the reality. I would rather leave the account unpaid right now than having to defend myself in front of a billing department. In any case, it probably doesn't care. Then there is the matter of what follows. Because there is really no support system left for me as I sit here. It's okay that I'm alone. It's preferable to being surrounded by individuals who don't truly understand it. However, there is a persistent notion in the back of my mind, accompanied by a small, obnoxious voice that asks, what if they were right? Could it be that you were exaggerating? And that thinking makes me question everything, which is why I detest it. Even after I've pushed them all away, it seems like they still hold on to me. Like I can't completely get away from their kind of assistance, no matter what I do. I was looking around Reddit a few days ago in an attempt to divert my attention when I saw a post from someone who had experienced a similar situation. They discussed how no one truly understood what they needed and how they felt deceived by those closest to them. It was like staring into a mirror, I promise. I wanted to tell them I understood by reaching through the screen that I was fully aware of their emotions. I started to question whether I'm as alone as I believe. Perhaps there are other individuals out there who have experienced the same things, who have had their faith in those they believe to be caring broken. But that's all done online in the end. I don't know any of those folks, and they don't know me. Furthermore, knowing that others understand is helpful, but it doesn't actually address the problem. I remain here, still by myself. I'm still bearing this burden that no one else seems to comprehend. And perhaps that's my new normal. Perhaps I'm the only one now, resolving issues one day at a time. I can't stop thinking about that day. I'm wondering whether there was anything I could have done differently. Perhaps I might have communicated more clearly that I simply needed someone to listen. All of this would not have occurred. Or perhaps it was unavoidable. Perhaps they couldn't look past their own fear and would have done this regardless of how I said it. I'm not sure, and I might never find out. I just know that I am now the one left to face with the consequences. I quote am asking the internet now. I chopped them all off. Am I the jerk? Because that seems like my only remaining option from where I'm sitting. What's the purpose, really, if I can't trust the individuals who were meant to support me? To cheer myself up, I won't keep them around any longer. I need people in my life that care about me and don't view me as a problem that has to be solved. And it's okay if it means working alone for the time being. I might be prepared to let them back in someday. Perhaps once enough time has gone by, I'll be able to reflect and view things in a different light. However, I'm still upset, still wounded, and still carrying that $10,000 reminder of their assistance as of right now. So, when I said, enough is enough, was I the *? Sincerely, I don't believe I am. However, I'm willing to hear your opinions.